There is a kind of discipline that makes others feel uneasy just by being near you. Not because you talk more than they do, not because you try to prove you are better, but simply because you always show up. Same time, same actions, repeated every day without needing to be reminded, in a world where most people give up after a few weeks. That kind of steady presence is like a sword that has been drawn and never sheathed again. You have probably seen people like that. They do not talk about motivation. They do not share tips or complain about how hard things are. They just do, day after day, and that, in itself, makes others uncomfortable, even intimidated, because their discipline quietly reveals a truth many would rather not face. The problem has never been about ability, but about a lack of consistency. If you have ever wondered why some people keep moving forward without forcing themselves, why their discipline seems unbreakable, then this video was made for you. This is not a story about fleeting motivation, nor is it about hollow advice. This is the path of the samurai and Zen, where discipline does not come from willpower, but from identity. Before we dive deeper into that path, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Not just to hit some video quota, but so that each time the bell rings, it serves as a quiet reminder that the path you are on must be walked every single day, without interruption, without negotiation. Now, take a moment, slow down, take a deep breath, push aside all the outside noise, and let us begin the main content. Most people do not fail because they are weak, but because they are stuck in a loop they do not even recognize. Every time they start, they carry real determination. They believe this time will be different. They believe that a new wave of motivation, a new tool, or a new promise to themselves will be strong enough to change everything. But after just a few days, or a few weeks, the same old pattern quietly returns. At first, there is excitement, the body cooperates, the mind is energized, everything seems to be going in the right direction. Then one morning, a tiny thought creeps in. Not a protest, just an innocent little question. Do I really have to do it today? That one question opens the door. From that moment on, discipline is no longer an action. It becomes a negotiation. The samurai do not see the world that way. To a samurai, once a decision has been made, it is no longer up for discussion. The sword does not ask the hand if it feels tired today. The feet do not ask the mind whether the path is too long. When there is still room for negotiation in an action, it has never been true discipline, it is merely a fragile intention. What causes people to repeat failure is not a lack of strength, but the fact that they always leave themselves an exit. They allow themselves to believe that skipping one day is harmless, that making a small change will not matter, that quitting once does not say anything about who they are. But all those little exits add up, creating a very familiar road, one that always leads them back to the same spot, carrying the same line. Maybe this just is not for me. In Zen and the way of the sword, there is no such thing as for me or not for me. There is only doing or not doing, only moving forward or stopping, and that ruthless simplicity is what makes the samurai's path completely different from that of the ordinary person. Where ordinary people seek motivation, the samurai removes negotiation. Where most people hope to feel good, the samurai builds a structure that does not require feelings at all. And that is the turning point. Because to escape the cycle of failure, people do not need more motivation. They need something much deeper, a principle strong enough to shut down every negotiation before it even begins. In Zen and the path of the samurai, discipline does not start with action. It starts with identity. A man never asks himself whether he should draw his sword, because in that moment, he is not someone weighing options. He is a swordsman, and a swordsman draws his sword, not because he feels inspired, but because it is what he does. Most modern people live as if they are trying to become someone else. They say they are trying to train, trying to meditate, trying to change, but that word, trying, keeps them trapped in the role of someone who is not yet. When difficulty shows up, they naturally fall back into their old identity, because that is who they still believe they are. A Zen master does not try to meditate. A samurai does not try to train with the sword. When a person steps into a Zen monastery, takes an oath before the community, and puts on the robe of a monk, something profound happens. He is not just accepting a new responsibility, he is letting go of the old self. From that moment forward, practice is no longer a choice. It becomes an expression of identity. People do not betray what they truly believe themselves to be. A person can abandon a plan, but it is much harder to betray an identity. When you say, "I will try to meditate every day," the brain understands that this is a soft commitment, something flexible. But when you say, "I am someone who meditates every day," you are not describing an action. You are declaring who you are. That is why, in the traditions of the samurai and Zen, identity is never kept silent. It is spoken, it is witnessed, because when the outside world hears it, the inner mind understands that breaking the promise is no longer just a personal failure, it is a collapse of honor. And to a warrior, honor matters more than comfort. Once identity shifts, something strange happens. The inner dialogue begins to fade. The question, "Should I do this today?" loses its weight and eventually disappears. Not because difficulty no longer exists, but because difficulty no longer has the power to veto action. Just like a samurai steps out to train with his sword, whether it is raining or snowing, not because he does not feel the cold, but because the cold is no longer a reason to stop. It is at this point that discipline begins to take on a different shape. It is no longer tension or pressure. It becomes a natural state, like the way you breathe or the way you stand upright. But even when identity is fully formed, there is still one final battle to face, not in the mind, but in time. Because as long as time remains negotiable, the new identity still has a weakness, and that is why the samurai not only define who they are, but also lock in the exact moment they take action. Even with a clear identity, people can still slip if time is left open. Wherever the question, "when," exists, negotiation still lingers, and negotiation, no matter how small, is enough to pull you back onto the old path. The samurai understand this well. That is why they do not just decide what they will do, but precisely when it will happen. Ordinary people believe they must find the optimal time to act, morning or evening, before or after a meal, when energy is high or when other tasks are done. But each of those decisions drains mental energy that could have been used for the action itself. By the time the sword is drawn, they are already tired from thinking. For the samurai, time is not optimized, it is fixed. A time is chosen, not because it is convenient, but because it is non-negotiable. When that hour arrives, the action happens. There is no room to reconsider, no chance to delay. Just like when the meditation bell rings in a Zen monastery, no one asks whether they should meditate today. The bell rings, and the body rises on its own. When time is held constant for long enough, something subtle begins to happen. The body learns before the mind. It starts preparing for that moment even before you consciously think about it. You wake up a few minutes earlier. Your limbs begin to move before a single thought is formed. Action is no longer triggered by motivation, but by rhythm. This is something most people struggle to accept. They believe freedom lies in having many choices. But the samurai know that true freedom comes from eliminating choice. When time is no longer a variable, the mind loses a battlefield, and every battlefield that is removed is one less fight that needs to be fought. However, locking in the time only closes half the door, because even when you always show up on time, the mind can still find another way out. It no longer asks when, but instead begins to ask a more sophisticated question. What should I do during this time today? And that question opens the next battle, the battle of variety, of change, of the desire to do something different. This is where many people believe flexibility is a strength, but the samurai know it is actually a weakness. Once time is fixed, the mind does not fully surrender. It simply changes its strategy. If it cannot bargain over when, it begins to bargain over what. This is the place where many believe they are progressing, when in fact, they are simply circling in a more sophisticated form of procrastination. People often believe variety keeps things exciting. They switch up workouts, change methods, try new approaches, hoping to avoid boredom, but the samurai understand, boredom is not the enemy. The true enemy is choice. Every small choice, no matter how harmless it seems, forces the brain to decide all over again, and each time a decision is made, the door to negotiation creaks back open. In the way of the sword, a samurai does not train 10 techniques at once. He repeats a single strike thousands of times, until the body forgets it is even training. The sword swings on its own. The body adjusts automatically. The mind is no longer present to interfere. That is not monotony. That is refinement. When actions change every day, the brain cannot shift into automatic mode. It must constantly observe, evaluate, and compare. But when the actions are exactly the same, in the same context, day after day, the brain eventually lets go. It understands there is nothing left to debate. And in that moment, discipline begins to run on its own. The samurai does not seek inspiration in training. He seeks repetition, not because he hates creativity, but because he understands that creativity only emerges after the foundation is solid. When the foundation is still shallow, every change is just a subtle way to avoid facing discomfort. In the beginning, repetition triggers fierce resistance from the mind. It whispers that this is pointless, that you are not a machine, that without change, you will burn out. But the samurai knows that voice is not wisdom, it is the old instinct struggling to survive. And if you do not give in, that voice will gradually fade. There comes a moment, hard to detect, when you begin to act before awareness even shows up. You have completed part of your training sequence before your mind realizes you have started. That is the sign that discipline has left the realm of willpower and entered the body. But even when the path has been narrowed to a single lane, there is still one final trap. Not variety, not time, but the imperfect days. The days when you are tired, sick, overwhelmed, or unexpectedly interrupted by life. And it is here that many people, even after coming so far, end up falling. Eventually, it is not the lack of discipline that causes people to stop, but the imperfect days. The days when the body feels heavy, the mind is drained, the schedule collapses, or life barges in uninvited. Most people believe these are signs to rest, to wait for a better day to start again. But the samurai does not treat these days as exceptions. He sees them as part of the path. The greatest mistake of modern people is believing the lie of all or nothing. If they cannot do it fully, they choose to do nothing at all. If it cannot be perfect, they give themselves permission to stop. But that exact moment creates an opening. And in that opening, old habits return quickly, like a door left ajar in the middle of the night. In Zen, practice does not require perfection. It requires continuity. A river in the dry season may shrink to a small stream. But as long as the water keeps moving, it is still a river. The moment it stops completely, it no longer exists. Your practice is the same. When you stop, you are no longer someone who practices. You are someone who used to practice. The samurai understands that not every day will allow the same intensity of training. Some days, the sword feels heavier, the breath shorter, the steps slower, but instead of waiting for perfect conditions, he adjusts the intensity, not the presence. Light instead of heavy, short instead of long, silent instead of complete, but never nothing. It is this flexibility in intensity, paired with rigidity in consistency, that creates a very different kind of strength. It is not loud, it does not impress right away, but it sinks into the body, into the nervous system, until stopping feels more unnatural than continuing. Outsiders often misunderstand this. They think the samurai is too extreme, too rigid, too obsessed, but they fail to see the core truth. The samurai is not obsessed with perfection. He simply does not allow disruption. Because once the flow is broken, everything must begin again from the start. When you maintain uninterrupted practice long enough, discipline begins to take on a new quality. It no longer needs to be defended. It stands on its own. But even then, there is still one final danger. Not fatigue, not boredom, but the unexpected, situations you cannot prepare for unless you have already thought them through. There comes a moment when even you do not realize you have changed. There is no celebration, no clear sense of victory. Just an ordinary morning where you wake up and do what needs to be done, before you have time to wonder whether you feel like it. Discipline, at this point, is no longer effort, it has become your natural state. People around you begin to notice before you do. They say you are different, less reactive, less prone to complain. They do not understand how you keep going on tired days, on busy days, on days when nothing lines up just right. And it is exactly this lack of understanding that makes them uncomfortable. Because your presence quietly reflects the promises they once abandoned. You will hear familiar lines. That you are too extreme. That you are obsessed. That life needs balance. But the samurai understands. Those words are not meant to protect you. They are meant to protect the speaker's comfort. Because when you keep moving forward, you unintentionally reveal that what they call impossible is actually just unwilling. This is the moment when discipline begins to take the shape of silent power. No need to show off. No need to prove anything. You are not trying to convince anyone to follow your path. You simply continue, day after day, and it is this silence that makes your discipline intimidating. Because now, you are no longer someone building a habit. You have become someone who cannot live without it. Just as a samurai cannot hold his sword with trembling hands, you can no longer return to inconsistency, not because you hate it, but because it no longer fits the person you have become. This transformation does not make you perfect. It makes you unbreakable. You still get tired, you still face setbacks, you still have heavy days, but no day is heavy enough to stop you completely. The current still flows, whether fast or slow. And that is what very few people truly understand. Real discipline is not about doing the right thing every day. It is about becoming someone who cannot do anything else. When that happens, the question, how can I be more disciplined, disappears. Because the answer is no longer found in your actions, but in who you are. This path is not meant for the majority. It demands the end of an older version of yourself, the version that always searches for excuses, waits for the right mood, and keeps a back door open. And from that ending, a different person is born. Quiet, steady, unshakable. If one day, someone looks at you and says you are not normal, that your discipline makes them uncomfortable, know that you have gone far enough. Because discipline that makes others uneasy is the clearest sign that you have stepped outside the circle of the ordinary. And in that moment, you do not need to explain. You just keep going. When your discipline starts to make others uncomfortable, it is not a sign you are on the wrong path. It is a sign that you have left behind the world of unfinished promises. Ordinary people need you to slow down so they can feel better about staying still. But the samurai does not live to be understood. He lives to be unbreakable. True discipline is not doing something every day. Discipline is becoming someone who no longer knows how to live any other way. When that happens, you no longer ask yourself whether you should keep going. You just go, quietly, precisely, without interruption. If this path speaks to something inside you, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, not to watch more videos, but so that every time the bell rings, it reminds you that discipline does not need inspiration, it needs presence. And before you go, leave a comment, just one sentence, a public declaration. What will you train, every day, without fail? The path of the samurai begins in that very moment.